Like when I watch the movie now, it almost seems like he took the job as the caretaker specifically so he could kill his family. Like he just needed a location to kill them.
Welcome to Your Favorite Movie is Racist. I'm Chris.
I'm Tawny.
I'm Miles.
And we are two blacks and a Mexican, here to tell you what you should and shouldn't like. No, this show is a lot of fun to do. If you caught our first episode about aliens, thank you. And thank you for joining us again. This time we're talking about another classic that all three of us really enjoy. Stanley Kubrick's 1980 film, The Shining, starring Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, and that little kid that we all remember. Let's just dive into it. What do we love about The Shining?
In terms of just ambient terror and like feeling of foreboding, I don't know. There's not a lot that tops it, and I mean just technical excellence. But I was watching it the other day, and it's like as soon as it starts, it's like dun, dun, dun,
Yes.
dun. And somehow that's not overdoing it. It's like it's like just the right note for that, and there's no doubt in your mind that you're about to watch something that's deeply upsetting.
I didn't realize it until like I got older, but like horror is probably, I guess that's like my favorite genre because I seem to watch it nonstop. Like I didn't realize it, like, but I watched a lot of this stuff when I was younger, and I just like as I get older, like I can go back and reflect. This is one of those ones where it's like it's shot well, like the acting is incredible, including like some of the people like Shelley Duvall, who they kind of berated for her act. I think she got a Razzie for this too.
Yeah,
I actually think she fits perfectly
I think
in
she's
this
great.
movie, the way that she is acting. So the acting is great, and it's one of the only like Stephen King adaptations that are like successful to me. Like as far as movies, like
Not
this is
according
one
to
of
him.
Yeah.
Right.
I know they say a lot about like elevated horror today, like being like the genre. This to me is like kind of what that is to me, because it's not really a lot of jump scares. It's very intellectual. It's very psychological, which is basically what elevated horror is. I feel like this is that. This is like the granddaddy of all the other ones. It's like it has that very 70s style of, it doesn't feel like an 80s movie, even though it's like right on the cusp.
Yeah, it's like the last the last movie of the 70s almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean for me, like what came to mind is like every time I watch this movie, it makes me want to make a movie. Um, because it's just such a like filmmaker's movie to me.
Mhm.
You sit and you watch it, and they say great filmmaking is when you don't notice the editing and all that kind of stuff. But when you are somebody who aspires in storytelling and wants to grow as a storyteller, you're just inclined to look for those things anyway, I think. And just the shots, the symmetrical shot. You know, I was gonna make a comment about how like I'm the only non-Kubrickian person here because y'all both have super symmetrical kind of vibes going on right now, which is kind of dope. And I'm like, oh, I should have figured out a symmetrical way to position myself. Yeah, I sit and watch it, and I'm like, man, like the score, the positioning of each shot, the composition, the intentionality behind everything, it feels so intentional. And then therefore you find yourself watching the background and watching like everything that's going on to try to kind of piece together this puzzle.
One thing that really stood out to me this last time was like, I've never seen more fabulous rugs. I don't think they're they're the most gorgeous rugs. And I was in a Zoom meeting for work recently, and one of the participants had that as their background, and I was so jealous. Just as I mean, those artistic notes, and I think I'm making light of it a little bit, but it's a united artistic vision. He's an auteur at the height of his abilities and his vision.
Yeah. I think a lot of like Kubrick's like films. I'm actually not a huge fan of his work, ironically. You would think based upon like a lot of stuff that I do watch that I would be. I actually find quite a bit of his films to be not only just problematic, just like the characters that he chooses to write, but I think he's a genius as it relates to like because this film is groundbreaking. There's a lot of things that came out of this film being made, but there's things like Full Metal Jacket. Like I love like the beginning of that movie, and then the rest of the movie, I don't care.
We need to
Like
talk about that movie someday because I feel that way too. I'm like, I only need to watch the first half.
yeah, I watched that,
Mhm.
and even A Clockwork Orange, which is like a that's a difficult movie to watch just in
Yep.
general. Like it's just challenging for me to watch, and I watching it, I love the artistry behind it. But I'm like, this is an unpleasant experience. This is not like a movie that I actually want to watch.
Hmm.
Like, and I think The Shining, like he does well, where it is troubling, it is unsettling, but it also is something that's beautiful to look at. I want to actually watch it again and again. Whereas a lot of his other films, I don't ever want to see that again. Like I just
Yeah.
don't want like I
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think the framework of it being overtly a horror movie um, is helpful with that.
Yeah, the genre framing helps for sure. And I think like for me, the performances, I mean, yeah, like it's kind of well documented that he treated the cast the way he wanted them to, to provoke those performances out of them. Um, but yeah, what's left is a piece of art where we get to see these performances and context removed um are pretty groundbreaking. Like this is our second movie in a row where I'm going to talk about how great the kid in it is. Danny Lloyd.
Actually, literally just earlier today, I think it was like prior to the release of Doctor Sleep, and they interviewed him. And I caught kind of just the beginning of his conversation about how he got on that film. And there's that rumor where he didn't know what movie they were making. He didn't know it was a horror movie. Like
That's what I
they,
heard. And I heard that before. Yeah.
and he kind of sort of expounded on the fact that no one like explicitly told him, we're making a horror movie. And he really didn't know, but he kind of like kids are smart, and he was like, as we were making the movie more and more, I kind of started to realize when like my mom was like, Scatman's getting the axe tomorrow, like I kind of put two and two together, like
That'll
Literally.
do it.
yeah. So like he technically they tried to keep like there were certain scenes like where he sees the twins, like in the bathtub and everything. Like there are scenes where he's not there for
Hmm.
that to
That
see
makes
any of
sense.
that. They
Yeah.
film him just being scared. So they're filming his face and then they're like doing the other stuff. So a lot of the terrifying stuff he never saw.
Which is
It's
doubly
interesting.
impressive, like,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
he looks terrified. He comes across as a kid who's like, I mean, in this story, he's experienced abuse. He's kind of a crushed little soul.
Yeah.
And man, that kid, I don't know where he came from or how they got that performance out of him, but it feels very real.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
He's no,
that
what's
scene.
the guy, Jake Lloyd? He's no Jake Lloyd.
Oh man. Don't leave Jake Lloyd.
My favorite, like when I was rewatching it, the scene that really stuck with me, and that every time it comes up, I kind of forget it's in the movie, and then the scene plays out. I'm like, oh yeah, because there's something about that scene with him and Jack Nicholson where he's sitting on the bed.
Oh yeah. Oh, it's so
That
bad.
scene messes with
It's
me
so
because
fucked up.
in the movie is totally from Danny's perspective.
Hmm.
It's always these shots from behind his back. He's walking into these things. And so a
Mhm.
lot of it is sort of from his perspective. And so he walks in and his dad's sitting on the bed. And then you see that shot of Jack in the mirror when he walks in. And it's so composed so well because that same setup is used later for the, red rum scene.
Yeah.
But and then he goes over to him and that like you see Jack's and that's the acting on his part too, like his shift from being this so detached
Hmm.
to being homicidal. And he's like, "Who told you that? Your mom?"
Yeah, who
And
told you that your mom?
that
Yeah.
shift of like, oh, that's the trigger for him.
Hmm.
And just so well done in capturing that because it's like, man, that's timeless.
Hmm.
Like And Tawny, it's crazy because you talk about abuse, like, that's what my takeaway has been from that movie the last few times I've watched it, is like, this is about abuse,
Mhm.
Yeah,
like,
literally.
1, I never bought that he was sane. Um,
He doesn't play it that way.
No.
Yeah. It almost seems like like when I watch the movie now, it almost seems like he took the job as the caretaker specifically so he could kill his family. Like he just needed a location to kill them because
that
because he's completely out of his mind from which which is obviously like Stephen King hugest gripe with the movie is just his portrayal of Jack Torrance.
well, so I think one thing that we've kind of transitioned there already, but, like, I think part of what makes this movie a classic too is what went into making it, and what the undertones and themes that we sort of have to guess at in terms of what Kubrick was trying to do. Um, and so I actually wanted to talk about this before we get into the racist because I don't think this part of it necessarily qualifies. Um, I think part of this movie is about prejudice and like, to me, the theme, a lot of the themes tie into one, America supplanting Native Americans,
Mm.
indigenous people, right? And we have this place that's which, like many Stephen King stories, involve in
Indian burial.
Burial ground.
exactly. But in this case, that comes up in terms of the artwork. It's talked about by these white men as like, oh yes, the Native American, like, there's this, and then Jack's comment about the white man's burden,
Mhm.
um, and this idea that white people have appointed themselves to make the world better and carry that burden. And I think that he is intentionally pointing that out. Um, and the fact that we'll get into more about the character of Dick Hallorann soon, but there's aspects of that to me are saying something about racism and prejudice and white supremacy.
Mhm.
um but it's complex because there's aspects of it similar to the abuse angle
Mhm.
that I think are kind of ironic given what else the movie's doing.
Yeah, just to kind of note, the way that like, I can't imagine describing a vicious, triple homicide where children were axed to death quite in the way that the guy behind the desk does. And I think the way that's done is pointing to the sort of manners that are covering the grossness underneath, which is, like this beautiful exterior, this polite exterior, this proper, respectable exterior. And the guy who did it, like his ghost, he's British. He has a British accent, and it's like he's so
Hmm.
proper, and he hacked his family to pieces. And like the exchanges where he's talking to Jack, I think there's like a savagery that's beneath those manners, that's being pointed to on some level.
I almost need to maybe read the book to see like what his perspective was. Stanley Kubrick, like him and King weren't really fond of each other. Like, he literally I think it was in the contract that he was supposed to be able to he was allowed to write one version of the script or whatever. They didn't have to use it, and it was they never had any intention of using it.
They George Lucas Tim.
Good job, good try, Stephen.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna use this.
I think he liked there was I think he saw that there was some potential in the story there.
Hmm.
And then he basically is like, "Yeah, okay, thanks."
I mean, but and I think that maybe that's where we can close our greatness segment, is in saying like that pairing produced that movie, right? Like Stanley Kubrick had a story he wanted to tell, I think. And in order to get it made, he sort of had to insert it into King's characters and story. Generally, the story is there, but what Kubrick did with it in my opinion, and I think it sounds like both of y'all agree, like elevated it
Oh
and made
yeah.
it something
I think so,
something truly unique and special, you know?
and just very dark. Like I think,
Yeah.
and I this maybe sounds counterintuitive, but I feel that not always, but there are moments where Stephen King veers away from darkness because I think ultimately his stories are optimistic. Like there's an
Mhm.
optimism, there's a belief in redemptive goodness, and I that does not exist in Kubrick's version of The Shining.
What's wrong with The Shining, and why would it be on a show like this?
So we were brainstorming, and I had actually recently seen Doctor Sleep for the first time, like during the quarantine stuff. Like that's the first time I sat down and watched it. And as much as I did enjoy that movie overall, um, I felt uncomfortable about Dick Hallorann, and I started to think about. I think a good chunk of my favorite Stephen King narratives, whether they're film or text, have this character that and I finally tracked down a coin by Spike Lee in 2001 and he was using it in reference to the character of John Coffey in The Green Mile, and I think he referred to him and Bagger Vance as the super duper magical Negro. And so that's a trope that more and more has been bothering me when I sit down to watch some of these movies. And it's what's difficult about it is the warmth in my heart I feel for a character like Dick Hallorann.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like the way he makes me feel so happy, and like he's gonna save Danny, and he knows what's going on, and he's gonna help him. And then the discomfort with realizing that that's not necessarily a good thing, or at least it's not in the framework of the magical Negro trope, which Stephen King is quite fond of.
Yeah.
So the Stand, if you we have Mother Abigail, we have, as I mentioned, John Coffey in The Green Mile. I don't know if you guys have read The Talisman, but that was my favorite growing up, and that's Speedy Parker. Similar character notes to like Dick Hallorann in The Shining. But that's what I think. That's what we're going to talk about. Is so actually, if you don't mind, I found and I've read like about I don't know half a dozen essays in the last couple days, and I found a definition that I think really captures sort of the bullet points of what that trope looks like. Would it be cool to just run through those
Yeah,
just so we
go
sort
ahead.
of have okay. So this is from an essay by Nedi Okorafor, um, and she says, and she's a fantasy writer. Um, um, Here are what I call the 5 points of the magical Negro. The five most common attributes. He or she is a person of color, typically black, often Native American, in a story about predominantly white characters. He or she seems to have nothing better to do than help the white protagonist, who is often a stranger to the magical Negro at first. He or she disappears, dies, or sacrifices something of great value after or while helping the white protagonist. He or she is uneducated, mentally handicapped, at a low position in life, or all of the above. He or she is wise, patient, and spiritually in touch. That sort of, and then I'm just going to interject right here. Like some of the essays that I've read refer to the idea of the noble savage. Um,
Mm.
and then closer to the earth, one might say, he or she often literally has magical powers.
Yeah, the magical Negro is interesting to me. This I actually got into an online discussion with somebody. I'll call it a discussion um, about Song of the South, the Disney movie that basically Disney wants to forget about, and a lot of people have taken issue with Disney kind of trying to separate itself from that movie because they don't see anything wrong with it. Uncle Remus is the magical Negro in that movie, and he is lives on a plantation. I think it's post slavery, but he's kind of I think his role is still he's a laborer on the plantation, and he's super happy and just happy to be there and happy to
Zippity
be in
doo dah.
service. Exactly.
Yeah,
And people are like, "Well, what's," I got into a discussion with somebody. I'm like, that I as much as some people may love that movie and consider it a classic, I just maybe we'll get into that movie one day, but I just don't see the value. I don't care, like, what it's not that he's portrayed in some sort of like horribly negative way. He's a likable character. But the problem is that there's no nuance to that character. He's just happy to be who he
Mhm.
is in service to everyone else. And it just reinforces what we as Black people and people of color are we kind of feel the societal pressure to be that, to be, uh,
accommodating. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's the idea of like I always have this conversation with people when I like have to apply for a job or uh, go to a new place. I always feel incredibly uncomfortable because I'm in a room, I'm in a field where predominantly it's pretty much white. Like the entire field is white, and everybody's nice. It's not like that anyone is overtly evil towards me.
Hmm.
It's just there's a level of discomfort sometimes because I've been often asked to assimilate to the culture of the office. So, well, we need you to be more involved in our life, right? Like we need you to accommodate, the way that we live to make us feel more comfortable with you being here because we didn't know you were black when we like pulled your resume like but now you're black and you're here and you got some good work, so yeah, you're here, but we need you to kind of assimilate to be more like this office. And it's that idea, like, and that's the bothersome part of like people like a like Dick Hallorann, where it's just like, why is this always the way that you have to write a black character where he's always in service like in some type of
Hmm.
way of the white counterparts in the movie, and he's actually just a jolly old black man, like
Hmm.
where and listen, this is a real person, right? Like, so that's the sort of the conflict too. Is like, well, this guy is like a real person though. Like, there is someone that was like this for
mhm.
sure. But why is this the go-to character every single time that you decide to portray? There's so many like varieties of personalities you could choose for this person. Like, why that?
Yeah, it's a like there. It's definitely like a feel good character that's designed for white audiences, and I use white as the shorthand sort of for.
Broad audiences.
Yeah, it's the and I encountered this in a number of the readings. It was just one of the ideas is that these characters exist to assuage assault. I always feel like I'm saying that word wrong. White guilt, and to present uh, white audiences with an acceptable and non-threatening, non physically threatening, non-sexually threatening image of Black people that they could feel comfortable with, as opposed to, in contrast to, Birth of a Nation style fear
Mhm.
inducing performances of Blackness. And really,
Yeah.
that's what I think that's what started to make me really uncomfortable, was like, this is a performance of Blackness. Who does it serve? It's actually this research study that I read. The title is A Superhumanization Bias in Whites' Perception of Blacks. And it's about this study. It says they provide, and this is the research, provide evidence for a novel contributor to prejudice in showing that superhumanization is associated with diminished recognition of Blacks' pain. Third, then they provide evidence for a novel form of dehumanization, one that treats humans, in this case blacks, as non-human, not through animalization or mechanization, but through depicting them as superhuman. So it feels good, but it's insidious.
Mm, I kind of like that. That's a dope like explanation of it that I've never heard. Where it's like, well, the average person will watch it and be like, well, what's wrong with him? He's not. He just seems like a nice guy. He seems like
Yeah,
a. I mean, like I love his character. He reminds me of my grandfather.
yeah.
Mhm.
Like he's
You remind me
just
of my grandfather.
yeah, he's just this sweet old man, basically. Like, and it's like, well, what's the problem with that? And it's like what you said, where it's like we have to portray them in a way where they're not human. Like they can only be some monolithic character that's one way or another way that we choose. But it's like to produce, like to show someone as, and it seems like, well, that's awesome. Like you guys get to be have magical powers or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but we don't have magical powers. Like
Right.
Yeah,
we're
We're
right.
people.
people.
And there are
So
very real statistics that show that like black people do not receive pain medication the way at the same rate as white people when they go into the hospital. Like black women, even when you correct for income and education, still die in childbirth at higher rates. So that it's actually a harmful thing. And I was in a conversation with a friend of mine who could not understand why this was a racist sentiment, but he said something like, I just believe black people are special. They're sort of like better at everything. And I'm like, that's racist. Like, that's not. I know you think that feels good. Yeah.
Like if there's anything that I, because I've had similar interactions with people, and there are these kind of ideas that black people are stronger or in some way more resilient. So I mean, I think like that, carrying that into this, you're creating a character and or even solidifying an image that says, yeah, we are othered, right? We are something different, something something that magical and mystical. And like I think when we were had our text exchange, that was my kind of reflection on the movie, was like, yeah, his whole role in the movie is to be magical and die.
Magical and
yeah.
die.
Like, and I am rewatching it, I'm like, man. And what's crazy is it's a very subtle form of racism, because what it does is presents him as a likable person. So, well, that can't be racist. And they even go as far as to have the villainous characters refer to him as a nigger in the
Hmm.
movie. And one might say, oh, that's the racist thing. But
Hmm.
actually, I think um, that was an attempt to acknowledge, like when you make villainous characters use that word, um, that is meant to sort of say bad
This
people
is a
use
bad
that word,
person. Yeah, absolutely.
right? And
Hmm.
so I don't actually consider that racism. What I consider the racism is that you spent you reintroduced this character halfway through the movie after having not seen him for a while, and then there's this long trek of him magically, hearing from Danny, and then making this long, Lord of the Rings-ish trek back to the Overlook, only to get
Immediately.
Immediate.
immediately killed.
And
Almost
that's
like
what
it's
it's
almost
just
comical. Like when you rewatch it, it's almost comical. Like when that's what's happening.
it's actually hard for me to watch that part now. Like I have a much harder time. And I think again when I put Doctor Sleep on and not too many spoilers, but so Hallorann doesn't die in the book. And they sort of hybridized the book and the movie for Doctor Sleep, and I think it's pretty well done. But I'm like, he's showing up to Danny's like in his late 30s or early 40s, and I'm like, Dick Hallorann still not off the hook for helping this guy?
Right.
Like he's still coming by? Like
yeah.
let him have a nap. Like give this guy a break
Right.
already.
Almost like don't understand the point of his character. Like to, like when you watch it now, it's like what was the point of that?
I
Like
actually wrote that down. I was like, I was watching it specifically with the lens of what is the purpose of Dick Hallorann's character. And what I wrote was Dick Hallorann reveals The Shining, establishes Jack as a murderer and a true threat beyond redemption, and then provides the family with a means of escape. And those are his purposes as a character. He reveals the concept of The Shining and kind of that it exists and gives somebody for Danny to use his power with. He then is killed, is the only character killed on screen. And if you don't have him there, you don't necessarily know whether Jack can be redeemed. And so he's actually killed somebody now. So like it kind of to me communicates he's too far gone. And then they need that rover thing that they got in at the end to escape, that he drove up there in. And so it's like it's all in service of these other story beats that needed to go somewhere. And so it almost feels like, yeah, his character, like, who will cry for Dick Hallorann? You know what I mean? Like, he's just there to serve all these other needs in the movie. He doesn't have an arc or any kind of, you don't know anything about him besides that he has a grandmother who also has The Shining, and he's a nice old man. To me, this is in a way more egregious than the Vasquez argument in Aliens, but it's also, in my opinion, a movie that I revere a little bit more than Aliens. For some reason, I think it's because, again, like me as a storyteller and somebody who wants to create things, I'm always kind of captivated by it. Um, and so in my head, I'm like, man, like this movie actually means even more to me than Aliens. But that thing actually offends me more than Vasquez and Aliens too. So I don't even know how to approach it. You know, next time you watch The Shining after us having this conversation, where does that sit with y'all?
Yeah, I think I agree. I think this is a more difficult and problematic character because the character, more than because the character of Vasquez is, as we discussed, like layered, interesting, not simplistic, not flattened. Um, I don't know, like I don't know. I don't like. I think, and I noted like I've been increasingly uncomfortable with with uh, with it. Like I don't enjoy. I can't really. I have a hard time watching the scene where he dies now. I just it just doesn't. It makes me upset, and it was always upsetting. Um, but it's. I think it's increasingly upsetting. That doesn't mean I don't think The Shining is a masterwork of cinema. Um, but I don't know that I am going to be watching. Just given the way I've been feeling when I watch it recently, I don't know that I'm going to be watching this a whole lot in my life going forward.
It's kind of undisputable that this is like you said, it's just like a master work of just like the filmmaking in it is really the high point of it. And I mean, the performances are great too, but just how meticulous and how like deliberate all the decisions are that you see inside of the movie are the things that make it like there's things that make it special. I feel like the portrayal here is definitely a lot more devastating than like Vasquez. Like Vasquez is such an awesome character to like spend time with while watching the movie. Like Dick Hallorann, his it's so bleak. It's just so like,
Yeah,
especially when you know the his, even yeah, even though Vasquez dies as well, it's like I feel like her death is like still badass. It's still like great. Whereas Dick Hallorann, who's just kind of been like service of everybody the entire movie, just the more I think about it, it's just like this nice old man just shows up and gets axed like immediately, like, and he's just trying to help like the entire time. It's so so depressing, like to think about it like that, him
right.
showing up. But I don't know if it for that reason. I guess it kind of hurts the movie a little bit, or maybe it makes the movie effective. I don't know because of that. But it is a challenging watch. Like when you I mean, and that's not and that's just that one part. There are other parts of this that make this like even more challenging. Like that's just
Like
one character.
the
Yeah.
weird furry blowjob and
Exactly. Yeah. There's
I thought we'd get through the whole episode without bringing up the
I
furry
have to bring
blowjob.
up the
Thanks a
furry
lot, Tawny.
the
blowjob.
bear.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's very odd. There's a lot of like very like sadistic things like in it, like where again, which makes it very successful as a horror movie. I think for that, maybe that's why I feel like maybe I'm talking myself out of it now. Like I feel like maybe that's even Dick Halloran's character dying almost like makes it even more successful as a horror
Yeah,
movie.
it
Like
is gutting. It's a gutting moment. You
yeah,
know, when he gets it, it's just, oh.
Yeah, that's I think that's the tension for me too, is that part of the pain of that movie is to see this man trek all the way out here and then get offed, and realize that like the situation is out of control. And if that doesn't happen, maybe that movie's not as good. Um,
Mhm.
But here's what I'll say. Here's what I'll, we last time we said classic with a conversation. Um, I guess for this one, I would say high art, low spirit.
Wow.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I
Yeah.
feel like it's a beautiful movie. It's really well made and just it crafted things that still exist in cinema. I think Fincher was born out of
Mm,
Kubrick.
that makes sense.
Like in
Mhm,
others, Denis Villeneuve, like this kind of atmospheric intensity, this the music, the using everything to kind of serve this mood. It's just so powerful and so important. But um I don't think I can watch this without um my head has to be in the right place for it.
mhm,
And I have to be willing to make that mental concession
mhm,
of that choice and decide like, yes, Dick Hallorann is a magical Negro whose only purpose in that story is essentially to serve other characters and then get killed. And that's the tragedy of it. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting to know that if the character was black in the book and survived, but the character was going to be white in the movie and died, but became a black character. It's kind of an interesting like thing to think about
mhm,
because on the surface, if we wanted to look at it with zero context and nuance, if you know the character dies in the book and lives in the book and dies in the movie, then you could attribute it to Stanley Kubrick and say like, oh, you just wanted to kill off the black guy. But knowing that he didn't want to cast the actor who ended up playing the part kind of adds a layer like, well, no, it wasn't written that way.
mhm. And
But it
it is, it's
just
interesting. It adds, it makes this whole rating system a little bit more complicated.
Yeah. Just to be clear, I will watch this movie. I don't know if that was clear. Or what I if I I'm definitely not throwing it away. I would still watch it because it's great filmmaking. But yeah, that
yeah.
that is a problem
Um yeah, so this is like I think where the conversation, much like the movie, needs to be uncomfortable. Um because if we're uncomfortable with the rest of the movie, like that moment is meant to be uncomfortable. It's just maybe it wasn't uncomfortable for all the same reasons that it was intended to be.
though. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that element of who he is and that trope um just adds another layer to it. Um so I guess our rating system needs some work.
Yeah,
but
something.
but we will get there. And I just want to, say that I loved having this conversation about this movie. It has consistently sat in one of my top 10 all-time movies that I revisit all the time. And this just adds another layer to think about whenever I do watch it again. Um, this is your favorite movie is racist, and one of my
It's
favorite movies is racist.
racist.
uh, we are two blacks and a Mexican. Thank you for joining us. Please subscribe, leave a comment, just letting us know what you think of The Shining and how you feel it lands on this kind of spectrum. And really think critically about what our movies do for us and what we need to do to really analyze our movies and the creators of them. So thank you all for joining us and goodbye.